Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Captain Avery Johnson sat near the back, quiet as usual, the faint hum of the base generators filling the silence between voices. She'd been stationed at Pristina Air Base for 3 months now, long enough for everyone to forget she'd ever been anything but the logistics woman. Paperwork, inventories, authorizations. That's what they saw when they looked at her. A mid-level officer buried in supply reports, not the kind of person whose name got painted beneath a canopy or called out in combat radio chatter. But sometimes, the most dangerous people are the ones you overlook. The coffee in the depot break room tasted like burnt rubber soaked in despair, but Avery drank it anyway. 5:30 hours. Another morning in purgatory, where the only battles were fought against spreadsheets and procurement delays. Her reflection in the monitor showed dark circles under sharper eyes. The kind of eyes that never really stopped scanning, calculating. You could tell a pilot by their gaze, that restless, analytical way they measured distance and risk in everything. Outside, the airfield woke with mechanical life. The smell of jet fuel, the whine of turbines warming up, shouted orders from maintenance crews. To the rest of the base, it was background noise. To her, it was heartbeat. She missed that rhythm, the one that pulsed through your blood when the engines came alive under your hands. On paper, she was Captain Avery Johnson, Supply Corps, 32. 8 years active service. No disciplinary record, no flight status. But that paperwork didn't mention the 200 combat hours logged in an A-10 Thunderbolt II, or the missions flown in Iraq, or the night she'd landed on one engine in a sandstorm to pull 2 Marines out of a firefight. None of that mattered anymore, not to them. Because one medical review board decided that a mild case of sleep apnea made her non-deployable. She argued, appealed, lost. And now she pushed paper while kids half her age played war. Lieutenant Marcus Webb entered, looking far too energetic for dawn. 24, fresh from officer training, his uniform creased with enthusiasm. Clipboard in hand, eyes full of that optimistic delusion that logistics could fix chaos. "Captain, we've got a discrepancy in the 30mm ammunition count," he said, setting the clipboard on her desk. "Warehouse lists 15,000 rounds. Manifest says 12. Flight line claims they need 20. Avery scanned the numbers, but her mind was elsewhere, on the faint sliver of sunrise catching the far edge of the tarmac. The light fell across Hangar 7, painting a golden line over its closed doors. "Split the difference," she murmured. "Order 10,000 more from Ramstein. Priority shipment. Use authorization Tango 49. Webb blinked. "Ma'am, that's a combat zone code." "Then it's good we're sitting on the edge of one, Lieutenant." He hesitated, torn between regulations and instinct. 3 months under her command had taught him one thing. When Captain Johnson used that tone, she was probably right. He nodded, made a note, and left muttering about paperwork. When the door closed, Avery's eyes returned to the window, to those 3 hangars in the shadowed corner of the base. Most officers never noticed them, or pretended not to. Their access levels ended 2 clearance tiers below what lay inside, but Avery had made it her business to know. Because inside one of them slept something beautiful, ugly to some maybe, but to her it was poetry written in titanium. An A-10C Thunderbolt II. The Warthog. The beast that saved ground troops and haunted enemy armor for half a century. Officially, it didn't exist here. Unofficially, she'd been keeping it alive. She found it by accident, a footnote buried in maintenance logs, a ghost entry for fuel consumption that didn't match any active aircraft. Curiosity turned into investigation. Investigation turned into obsession. She traced requisition trails, spare part requests, and fuel allocations until she pieced it together. There was a fully armed, flight-ready A-10 stored under restricted readiness. Forgotten, ignored, waiting. Every morning before her shift, She used her logistics clearance to inspect inventory. And every morning, she walked to Hangar 7, climbed into that cockpit, and powered up the systems just enough to feel her heartbeat sync with the engines. No one questioned it. Nobody ever questions logistics. She didn't know what she was waiting for, only that she couldn't stop herself from being ready. Because someday, someone would need that aircraft. And maybe, if the universe lined up just right, she'd get one more flight. At 6:15 hours, the sirens began. The sound sliced through the morning, long, mechanical wails that turned calm into chaos. Avery was moving before her mind caught up. Coffee cup abandoned, boots hitting the floor. She was halfway to the command bunker before the second siren finished its call. Lieutenant Webb appeared beside her, pale and wide-eyed. "What's happening?" "We're about to find out," she said, already knowing. Inside the bunker, the air was thick with voices, overlapping, urgent, scared. Radios blared in 3 languages. Maps glowed under flickering lights. Colonel Harrison, the base commander, stood like an island in the storm. 50 years old, gray at the temples, voice sharp as shrapnel. "Serbian paramilitary forces crossed the border 90 minutes ago," he said. "Mechanized infantry with tank support. Battalion strength may be more. 2 checkpoints overrun, advancing toward our outer perimeter." The words hit like cold iron. No one had expected a full-scale push. Someone asked about air support, another about NATO authorization. The answers weren't comforting. All available air assets are engaged elsewhere. Ramstein's scrambling a response team, but they're 2 hours out minimum. He looked at his watch. "We have 30 minutes before hostile armor reaches effective firing range." 30 minutes. That was the life expectancy of the entire base. Avery did the math automatically: fuel ranges, deployment timelines, ground defense capacity. None of it added up to survival. "What about close air support?" someone shouted. "Don't we have anything on site?" "Nothing operational," Harrison replied. "The A-10 in Hangar 7 is listed non-deployable. No pilot, no authorization, no." "I can fly it." The words were out before she realized she'd spoken. The bunker went still. Harrison turned toward her, brows drawing together. "Captain Johnson, your supply corps." "I have 200 hours in the A-10C," she said, voice steady, heart hammering. 3,000 total flight hours. Combat deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Grounded for medical review, not ability. That aircraft is operational. I know because I've been maintaining its readiness for 3 months. The silence that followed could have filled the hangar itself. Lieutenant Webb was staring like she'd grown wings. "Ma'am, you never said." "There was nothing to say," she replied softly. Then to Harrison, "Sir, you need that bird in the air. I can put it there." For a long moment, no one spoke. You could almost hear the decision forming, that quiet space where authority meets instinct. Finally, the colonel turned to his operations officer. "Get Captain Johnson to Hangar 7. Full weapons load. Authorization code Tango Echo 7. He faced her again. "You've got 20 minutes, Captain. Make them count." And just like that, her exile ended. She ran across the flight line alive with controlled madness. Ground crews shouting, sirens blaring, transport aircraft taxiing, the distant growl of tanks somewhere beyond the perimeter. Every step felt like shedding weight. The months of frustration, the humiliation of being benched, the quiet ache of purpose denied. Hangar 7 loomed ahead, its doors still sealed, guards at the checkpoint already on alert. She flashed credentials, rattled authorization codes faster than they could question them. The guards stepped aside, wide-eyed, sensing something they didn't understand. Inside, emergency lights painted the world in cold white, and there she was. The Warthog. Twin engines, shark-toothed nose, the massive GAU-8 cannon slung beneath like a thunder god's hammer. Master Sergeant Kowalski, the chief mechanic, stood by with his crew. A cigarette burned low in his hand, forgotten. He looked at her and grinned. Figured someone would remember her eventually, he said. Fuel topped, systems green, cannon loaded with 1150 rounds. 6 Mavericks rocket pods, sidewinder on the rail. How long, she asked, already pulling on the flight suit. 12 minutes for full loadout. Story of my life, she muttered, climbing into gear that still remembered her shape. The Nomex fabric carried the scent of fuel and old sweat. The helmet settled over her head like it had been waiting. The cockpit was cramped and perfect. Every switch, every dial, exactly where her fingers expected them to be. She powered up systems, engines roaring to life with a familiar rising whine. Amber lights flickered green one by one. Outside, crews scrambled clear. Inside, she was home. Hog 111 requesting immediate takeoff clearance, she said into her mic. After a pause, Harrison's voice came through. Hog 111 cleared for immediate departure. Runway's yours. Godspeed, Captain. She exhaled. Copy that, rolling. The Warthog began to move, slow and heavy, sunlight glinting off its scarred fuselage. Avery eased it forward, feeling the vibrations through her bones. 30,000 pounds of defiance. Throttle forward, the engine screamed. 80 knots. 100. 120. Rotation. The nose lifted and gravity fell away. The airfield dropped beneath her. For a moment, just a heartbeat, she wasn't the forgotten logistics officer anymore. She was Captain Avery Johnson, A-10 pilot, warrior, and stormbringer. She climbed into a sky that looked too peaceful for what was coming, and somewhere far ahead, the enemy was already moving. But they didn't know she was coming for them. Not yet. She leveled out at 8,000 feet, sky open and endless above her. Below, the landscape of Eastern Europe stretched like a scar, ridgelines, patchy forests, smoke already curling from villages near the border. Combat Control's voice cracked through her headset. Calm, clipped, far too calm for the chaos brewing below. Hog 111, multiple armor contacts bearing 045. Range 12 kilometers. Mechanized infantry and main battle tanks. You are cleared hot on all hostile targets. Rules of engagement. Weapons free. Avery's fingers hesitated over the master arm switch. She stared at the little red cover, the one that turned routine into war. Confirm Combat Control, weapons free. Affirmative, you are weapons free. Click. The switch flipped up with a satisfying snap. The cockpit lights changed tone, as if the machine itself understood it was awake again. For 3 months she'd been invisible, the forgotten captain in the supply office. Now every breath, every motion, carried the weight of 100 lives on the ground. Through the canopy she saw it, a column of armor crawling across the pale terrain like a metallic serpent. 8 T-72s, a ring of BTRs on their flanks. Infantry trudging behind, rifles slung, confident they owned the morning. They didn't. Avery dropped to 6,000 feet, throttles forward. The A-10 vibrated as the twin GE engines spooled higher, a low growl that lived somewhere between thunder and heartbeat. Her targeting pod locked onto the lead tank. A white square appeared on the HUD, pulsing steady. Rifle 1, she said. The Maverick missile detached, flared, and streaked away in a column of smoke. She didn't watch it hit. She was already locking the second. Rifle 2. 2 bright spears arced toward the earth. 3 seconds later, daylight turned orange. The lead T-72 erupted, turret thrown skyward in a slow, tumbling arc. The second vanished into a rolling sphere of dust and flame. Below, the formation shattered. BTRs swung wide, gunners scrambling, tracers clawing at empty sky. The enemy had no air cover, no idea where death was coming from. Avery's breathing slowed, not from calm but control. This was the part civilians never understood, that strange stillness inside chaos. the quiet mathematics of destruction. Combat Control Hog 111. 2 tanks confirmed destroyed. Continuing engagement. Copy Hog 111. Additional targets bearing 046. Range 9 kilometers. She armed another pair of Mavericks. The Warthog's wings flexed under the weight of purpose. Rifle 3, Rifle 4. Twin explosions rolled across the plain, shockwaves visible even at altitude. The comm channel filled with half-formed cheers from ground units who hadn't even known they had an angel overhead. Avery banked hard left, dropping altitude to 4,000 feet. Time for the gun. The GAU-8 Avenger waited, 7 barrels of vengeance, rotating faster than thought. She lined up on a cluster of BTRs, attempting to offload infantry. Hog 111 in height with gun. She squeezed the trigger. The world answered. A sound like tearing metal and thunder layered together ripped through the morning. The cannon's recoil shook the entire airframe, the nose vibrating as if possessed. In a heartbeat, the ground bloomed with fire. Rounds the size of soda cans tore through armor, chewing vehicles apart, scattering men who never even saw the jet. One BTR folded in half, another detonated as its fuel tank ruptured. Avery pulled up sharply, breath ragged, eyes scanning for threats. The threat receiver chimed, no radar locks yet. Good. She looped wide, sunlight flashing off the cockpit glass, and caught her reflection for a moment. A faint outline of a woman the world had forgotten. And she thought, so this is what home feels like. Her radio crackled again. Hog 111, be advised. Secondary armor wave 3 kilometers east of initial contact. Possible ZSU-23-4 in the mix. Ashilka, anti-air. Her stomach tightened. Copy that, visual search in progress. She climbed, scanning the horizon. Smoke trails, burning vehicles, chaos. Then there, the rhythmic sparkle of tracers arcing skyward. The threat receiver screamed, radar lock. Miss me, she muttered, banking hard right, dumping chaff and flares. Tracers carved the space where she'd been, a wall of orange fire. The Shilka's operator was skilled, tracking her turn, predicting her path. One wrong move and those 4 cannons would stitch her cockpit open. Avery forced a breath, heartbeat steady, fingers light. She reversed her roll mid-turn, yanking the stick left, pushing throttle full, 6 GS, vision graying. The A-10 protested but held. The radar tone flickered. The enemy lost lock for half a heartbeat. That was enough. Rifle 5, Rifle 6. Both Mavericks streaked downward. She pulled into a vertical climb, flares blooming behind her like orange flowers. The airframe shuddered, angry but loyal. 2 explosions blossomed below. The radar tone died mid-scream. Shilka down, she said, voice calm again. For a moment, only the sound of engines and her breathing filled the cockpit. Then laughter, quiet, disbelieving, escaped her lips. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to fly again. But here she was, alive, airborne, and rewriting the script. Below, the battlefield lay silent, except for burning metal. The first wave gone. The second forming. Combat Control Hog 111. First wave neutralized. Request vectors for next targets. Hog 111, second armor formation detected 3 kilometers rear of initial position. Estimate 6 tanks, multiple APCs. You are cleared hot. Copy engaging. She rolled the aircraft into another descent, sunlight slicing across the canopy. The second wave moved slower, cautious now. Their commanders had seen what one aircraft could do, but they still had to move forward, orders, pride, ignorance. Avery stayed low, using a ridge for cover, then popped up at the last second. The targeting reticle locked instantly. Rifle 7, Rifle 8. 2 more Mavericks flew true. Both tanks bloomed into flame before their crews could react. Then the gun again. a brutal, stuttering roar that felt like vengeance and salvation all at once. She walked the fire across the column until the remaining vehicles were nothing but blackened wrecks. Her ammo count blinked down, 600 rounds remaining. Enough. Combat Control Hog 111. All immediate threats neutralized. Enemy forces in retreat. Request further tasking. A different voice answered Harrison himself. Hog 111 returned to base. Outstanding work, Captain. You just saved this entire installation. For a long second she said nothing. The words didn't register. Save the installation. Copy Tower, she replied finally. RTB. She banked gently, turning toward home. The sky ahead was calm, impossibly blue. Behind her, smoke rose like ghosts. As the base came into view, she realized her hands were trembling. The adrenaline was fatting, leaving only exhaustion and something deeper: gratitude. Because for 3 months she'd lived half alive. And now, for 42 minutes of combat, she'd been whole. She lowered altitude, joined the pattern, and felt the soft tremor of landing gear locking down. The runway grew large beneath her, concrete streaked with heat haze. Touchdown perfect. Reverse thrust, brakes, deceleration. The A-10 slowed to a crawl. She taxied off the runway, heart still racing, the engine's rumble echoing in her bones. Ground crews lined the tarmac, silent at first, then clapping. Not military precision, human applause. Colonel Harrison stood at the edge of the flight line, cap under his arm, eyes tracking the aircraft that shouldn't have been flying. Avery shut down the engines, systems winking dark one by one. The silence that followed felt immense. She popped the canopy, unstrapped, and climbed down into sunlight that suddenly felt earned. Harrison approached. Up close, he looked like a man seeing something he'd never expected. Captain Johnson, he began formally, then stopped, words failing. Finally, he just said, "Hell of a job up there." "Thank you, sir." She pulled off her helmet, hair damp against her forehead, the faint smell of gunpowder still in her uniform. "The aircraft performed exactly as expected," she said evenly, "and the pilot exceeded expectations." Harrison almost smiled. "I'll say," he hesitated, lowering his voice, "I'll have questions later, like why a logistics officer just flew the most decisive sortie of this conflict." "Medical review board," she answered quietly. "Sleep apnea, paperwork delayed." He studied her for a long moment, then exhaled. "Well, consider that paperwork resolved." He turned, signaling the medics and technicians to clear the area. "Get her flight status reinstated, effective immediately." Behind him, Webb was staring at her, half shocked, half awed. "Ma'am, I don't even know what to say." "Say nothing, Lieutenant," she replied with a tired grin. "Just make sure the depot doesn't burn down while I'm gone." He saluted. She returned it. The hangar doors closed behind the Warthog as crews swarmed to refuel and rearm. And for the first time in months, Avery allowed herself to breathe, slow, deep, human. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who'd finally done what she was born to do. Outside, the sky was clearing, the enemy retreating, the world steadying again. But part of her wondered how long peace ever really lasted. Wars didn't wait for orders. And some wolves, once they taste the hunt again, never go back to the pen. What does silence sound like after war? Not peace, not really. Just the soft hum of engines cooling, the faint pop of contracting metal, the sound of people remembering how to breathe again. Captain Avery Johnson stood beside her aircraft, watching steam rise off the cannon barrels. The ground crews worked around her, voices hushed as if afraid to disturb the air itself. She could still feel the vibration in her bones, that deep, living tremor left behind after the GAU-8 spoke. Across the tarmac, soldiers stared at her like they weren't sure she was real. One woman, one jet, a few minutes of violence that had redrawn a border. And yet she didn't feel invincible. She just felt hollow. Master Sergeant Kowalski approached with a maintenance checklist in one hand and a grin that could have powered a generator. "Hell of a show, Captain. You made believers out of everyone today." Avery gave a faint smile. "You kept her alive, Sergeant. I just pointed her in the right direction." "Yeah," he said, tapping the Warthog's fuselage affectionately. "But it takes a certain kind of crazy to wake up a sleeping dragon." She looked at the blackened streaks under the nose, the soot caked around the cannon housing. "Dragons don't sleep forever," she murmured. Kowalski nodded like he understood more than he'd ever admit, then moved off toward his crew. The adrenaline was gone now, leaving only exhaustion. Avery pulled off her gloves and flexed her fingers, trembling, slick with sweat despite the cold. She couldn't stop seeing the targets in her head. Tanks burning, figures running, explosions blooming too bright to look at. Every mission had ghosts. She learned that long ago, but this one was different. Those weren't faceless enemies from some desert conflict a world away. These were people barely across a border, soldiers obeying orders as surely as she had obeyed hers. She leaned against the landing gear, eyes closed. "You did what you had to," she whispered to herself. The words didn't comfort her. They rarely did. Sometimes doing your duty still leaves a scar. The debriefing room smelled of burnt coffee and stress. Maps covered one wall, red pins marking the invasion route now erased by her sortie. Colonel Harrison sat at the head of the table, posture rigid but eyes softer than usual. To his right were two intelligence officers, to his left the base operations chief and a legal advisor. All of them looked at Avery like she was both miracle and problem wrapped in one uniform. She stood at attention. Her flight suit still smelled of jet fuel and victory. "Captain Johnson," Harrison began, his tone halfway between admiration and interrogation, "walk us through what happened from first contact to RTB." She did, calmly, technically, the way pilots learn to speak when adrenaline must translate into procedure. Target acquisition, engagement sequence, ammo expenditure. She laid it all out with precision, each word a gear in a machine built to avoid emotion. But the room wasn't listening for data. They were listening for the human under it. And Avery gave them only silence. When she finished, Harrison set down his pen. 13 tanks destroyed, 11 armored carriers, 1 anti-air system, enemy casualties significant. You turned what could have been a massacre into a decisive victory. He let that hang for a moment before adding quietly, "Without authorization, without backup, and without hesitation." Avery met his gaze. "Sir, authorization came from necessity. Backup wasn't available. Hesitation wasn't an option." That earned the smallest of smiles. "Fair answer." The legal advisor cleared his throat. "Technically, Colonel, her actions violated chain-of-command procedures, air asset deployment protocol, and—" "Technically," Harrison interrupted, "she saved every soul on this base. We can sort the paperwork later." The advisor closed his folder. Sometimes even lawyers know when to shut up. Harrison turned back to her. "Off the record, Captain, why were you the only one who knew that aircraft was still operational?" Avery hesitated. She could have lied. She could have said she stumbled on it this morning, but she was done hiding. "I've been maintaining it, sir, every morning before duty, checking systems, running diagnostics." "For how long?" 3 months. He exhaled slowly. "So while the rest of us thought you were managing inventory, you were keeping a combat jet ready for a war that wasn't supposed to happen." "Yes, sir." "Why?" She met his eyes. "Because wars never ask permission, sir, and because someone had to." The room went quiet again. One of the intelligence officers scribbled something, maybe a quote. Harrison leaned back, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. "You've got instincts I'd kill to bottle, Captain. The kind that saves lives when systems fail." Instinct, she said softly, is just memory you trust more than logic. He smiled at that, a real one this time. Well, your memory just saved NATO a crisis. The meeting moved on damage assessments, diplomatic fallout, next phase deployments. She answered each question with precision, but inside her thoughts drifted. She kept seeing the faces of Webb, Kowalski, the base personnel, the ones she might have buried if she hadn't acted. And somewhere deeper, another face flickered, her father's. An Air Force pilot himself. She'd grown up watching him disappear into the sky, convinced that flying was the only honest language people ever spoke. He used to tell her, "Courage isn't the absence of fear, kiddo. It's knowing which direction to fly anyway." Today she'd understood that better than ever. 3 hours later, the debrief was over. The officers filed out until only Harrison remained. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a bottle that definitely wasn't regulation and slid one across the table. "Off the record," he said. Avery raised an eyebrow but accepted. The whiskey burned the way truth does, sharp, cleansing, a reminder you're still alive. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked quietly. She thought for a moment. "I wasn't planning, sir. I was preparing. Planning means you expect something. Preparing means you refuse to be surprised when it happens." He chuckled. "That's the difference between survivors and casualties." They drank in silence for a few seconds. "Your medical review board?" he asked. "Sleep apnea. Paperwork stuck somewhere between departments. I submitted updates, never heard back." "Well," he said dryly, "someone in medical command just saw the gun camera footage. Apparently, they've decided sleep apnea doesn't disqualify a pilot who can pull 6 GS while killing tanks." Avery smirked faintly. "Funny how policy evolves under pressure." "Funny," he agreed. "You're cleared for full flight status as of 20 minutes ago. I'm reassigning you to advanced tactical air control. Recommendation for commendation pending." She blinked, processing the words. Full flight status, after everything. "Unless," Harrison added, "you'd rather go back to supply." Her answer came with a rare smile. "I think Lieutenant Webb can manage inventory just fine, sir." "Good," Harrison said, raising his glass again. "To preparation, opportunity, and knowing when to break the rules." They clinked glasses. And for the first time in years, Avery let herself laugh, low, tired but real. Outside, dusk settled over the airfield. Smoke still hung in the distance, pink and gold in the dying light. She walked alone along the flight line, helmet under her arm, listening to the wind slide over hangar roofs. She stopped beside the A-10. The ground crew had cleaned the soot from its nose. Fresh fuel lines snaked beneath its wings. It looked ready, almost eager. Kowalski appeared again, wiping grease from his hands. "We ran diagnostics. She's clean. You could take her up right now if you wanted." "Not tonight," Avery said. "Let her rest." He nodded, then studied her face. "You all right, Captain?" She looked at the plane. "You ever fix something for so long that when it finally works again, you're scared to touch it?" "Yeah," he said softly, "but you touch it anyway." She smiled. "Exactly." He left her there in the fading light. She ran her hand along the fuselage, cool metal beneath her fingers. The scars in the paint told a story, where rounds had bounced, where heat had blistered. It reminded her that survival isn't about perfection. It's about endurance. She whispered, "We did good today." No one answered, but somehow the wind felt like agreement. That night sleep didn't come easy. The base was quiet, but her mind was. Images replayed, the radar lock alarm, the flash of missile impact, the voice of combat control saying weapons free. She turned on her side, staring at the ceiling. The world would wake tomorrow to headlines about the logistics officer who saved a NATO base. She hated that thought. She hadn't done it for headlines. She'd done it because she couldn't bear watching people die while she sat behind a desk. And yet, under all the reflection and fatigue, a new question began to form, one that carried more weight than all the others. What happens next? Because the fight wasn't over. Wars didn't stop for paperwork or promotions. There would always be another threat, another decision no one wanted to make. And now that the world had seen what she could do, someone was going to come knocking. She didn't fear that, but she wondered what it would cost. Her father's voice echoed again in memory. Courage isn't free, kiddo. It always takes something from you, but it gives back meaning. She turned off the light, finally letting exhaustion pull her under. Outside in the darkness, the A-10 gleamed under floodlights, silent, watchful, alive. And though the war was over for the night, every person on that base slept easier knowing one truth. The quiet woman from logistics wasn't just keeping records anymore. She was keeping them all alive. Because when storms rise again, and they always do, someone will need to climb into the sky and remind the world what courage sounds like. And sometimes courage doesn't roar. It simply flies. They told her she was a hero. But all Avery Johnson heard was the sound of engines still echoing in her skull. The news spread faster than smoke. Before noon, every network carried the same headline: Logistics Officer Turns the Tide, the forgotten A-10 pilot who saved Pristina Air Base. They called her the ghost in the Warthog. They called her the paperwork pilot. They called her everything except what she actually was, a woman who'd done her job because nobody else could. Avery watched the coverage from the back of the ready room. The base's new arrivals, reporters, attachés, a few overeager colonels filled the air with words like valor, heroism, and strategic impact. It made her stomach turn. The footage looped again on the monitor. The gun camera feed from her A-10, the mechanical snarl of the GAU-8 tearing through armored columns. The image paused on a single frame, the moment a tank disappeared in flame. The room applauded. Avery just stared at the frozen image, at the fire she'd made. They saw glory. She saw ghosts. 2 days later, she stood in the hangar again, watching ground crews repaint the aircraft's tail number in bold white stencil. Hog 111, her bird now, officially assigned. Kowalski was nearby, clipboard under one arm, a rag in the other. He looked up at her. Never seen a maintenance order come through so fast. We're getting priority resupply from Ramstein, fresh munitions, new avionics modules. It's like Christmas for grease monkeys. Avery smiled faintly. Enjoy it while it lasts, Sergeant. Bureaucracy loves a hero right up until it finds a reason to bury them in paperwork again. He chuckled. You think they'll put you back behind a desk? I think they'll want to parade me first, she said dryly. As if on cue, Webb entered, a bundle of folders under one arm and a grin that didn't quite hide his nervousness. Ma'am, Command wants you in the operations building at 1300, press conference. They're calling it a morale address. Avery sighed. Of course they are. Webb hesitated, glancing at the aircraft. They're also talking about assigning you to a rapid response wing. Command thinks you might be more valuable as a symbol. Symbols don't fly missions, Lieutenant, she said quietly. They just make everyone else feel safe while the real work happens out of sight. Webb didn't know what to say. He'd seen her fly, seen what she'd done, but there was still a part of him, maybe the young officer in him, that wanted to believe heroes got happy endings. He cleared his throat. They want to give you a medal. Avery smirked, tired. I'd rather they give me a maintenance budget. The press conference was everything she hated: bright lights, scripted questions, and the hollow sound of applause that meant nothing. She stood behind a podium, uniform pressed, hair regulation tight, medals polished to mirrors. Flashbulbs popped, questions flew. Captain Johnson, what went through your mind when you volunteered for that mission? Captain, how does it feel to be called a hero? Do you think this changes the perception of women in combat roles? Avery answered with practiced calm. I did what needed to be done. The people on this base are the real heroes. I just happened to be the one in the air. The reporters loved that, humble, composed, exactly what they could package into headlines. But under the lights, she felt exposed. Like every second of silence carried a secret they didn't deserve to know, the fear, the guilt, the moment she'd almost died. When it was over, she escaped into the hallway, leaning against the wall until her heartbeat slowed. The echo of applause still clung to her like smoke. Harrison found her there. You handled that well, he said. She didn't look at him. I handled it. I'm not sure that's the same thing. He studied her for a moment. You're not comfortable with all this attention, are you? I'm comfortable in a cockpit, she said, not on a stage. Unfortunately, Captain, sometimes the stage is part of the mission. She turned toward him. Whose mission, sir? Mine or theirs? He didn't answer. Some truths outrank even colonels. 2 weeks later, the reassignment orders came through. Advanced Tactical Air Control Squadron, full flight status, deployment readiness, immediate. Avery read the paper twice before folding it neatly and tucking it into her pocket. It didn't surprise her, she'd known it was coming. What did surprise her was how quiet the base felt that morning. No sirens, no shouting, no chaos. Just the soft sound of a broom sweeping the hangar floor, the smell of jet fuel and rain. Kowalski approached carrying a small box. Got something for you, he said. Inside was a strip of metal, scorched, jagged, still faintly blackened. Fragment from your first gun run, he said. Pulled it out of one of the wrecks before Intel carted it off. Avery turned the metal over in her hand. It was heavy, ugly, misshapen, the opposite of a medal. Thanks, she said quietly. This one means more. He nodded. You heading out? Yeah, orders came through this morning. Kowalski's voice softened. You'll fly again. Maybe, she said, but flying isn't what scares me. What does? She slipped the fragment into her pocket. What happens when people start expecting you to save the world every time you take off? Her new unit operated out of a forward NATO installation tucked between forested hills and farmland, a place where mud and wind never left your boots. The pilots there were different, harder, quieter, their humor dark enough to scrape metal. They'd heard the stories, seen the footage, and though none said it outright, she could feel it in their glances. That's her, the logistics pilot, the miracle. Captain Avery Johnson became both legend and liability overnight. The flight commander, Major Ethan Ross, greeted her with a handshake that said he respected her but didn't quite trust her yet. Hell of a show at Pristina, Captain, he said. But around here, every sortie counts the same. No legends in my squadron, just pilots. Understood, she said. I prefer it that way. He grinned slightly. Good, then you'll fit in. But fitting in wasn't simple. The other pilots admired her and avoided her. No one wanted to be the one flying beside the ghost in the Warthog, because legends come with bad odds. Her first briefing was routine patrol routes, strike readiness, target acquisition drills. But she noticed something. The map on the screen looked too familiar. The same border region, the same terrain. Ross noticed her expression. You know this area. Avery nodded slowly, intimately. Good, he said, because command thinks lightning can strike twice. She didn't respond, because lightning never strikes the same place without burning something deeper the second time. That night, she sat alone in her quarters, staring at the fragment of scorched metal Kowalski had given her. She placed it on the desk beside her flight patch and the medal she'd been awarded that morning. The metal gleamed flawless. The fragment was raw, imperfect, real. She reached for the medal, then stopped, picked up the fragment instead. It was warm from her touch, edges rough enough to bite skin. She ran her thumb along it until a small line of red appeared. It stung, but it felt honest. War had a way of giving you trophies you didn't want and taking things you didn't know you'd miss. Sleep, silence, the ability to hear thunder without flinching. Outside, the wind howled against the windows. Rain hit the glass like distant artillery. She whispered to the night, "You never really stop fighting, do you?" The wind didn't answer. It never does. Weeks passed, training sorties, night flights, long hours in briefing rooms lit by screens and maps. She kept her focus sharp, but sometimes when the engine spooled up, she'd close her eyes just for a moment and hear the sirens from Pristina again. Each flight she wondered if she'd ever feel that same fire again, that perfect clarity when every motion mattered. She wanted it, feared it, needed it. Because once you've tasted purpose, routine feels like dying slowly. Ross noticed. "You fly like someone who's trying to outrun something," he told her after a mission. "Maybe I am," she said. He nodded. "Just make sure it doesn't catch you mid-turn." Back at Pristina, the story of the invasion became legend. Officers quoted it during briefings. Cadets studied it in classrooms. Somewhere, someone even commissioned a painting, a warthog cutting through dawn light, flames below, a single figure in the cockpit. Avery didn't see it. She didn't need to. Legends always looked better in art than in truth. But one night, as she was leaving the flight line, she caught a message over the comms network. A ground unit pinned down near the border, requesting close air support. The controller's voice carried strain. No other aircraft available. Her pulse quickened. She wasn't on alert rotation, not supposed to fly tonight. But she felt that old pull again, the same one that had driven her to Hangar 7. Duty, instinct, the refusal to let others die if she could stop it. She hesitated only once, then turned back toward the hangar. Because some people need orders to act, and others simply hear the call. That night, the A-10's engines roared back to life under a storm-torn sky. Lightning flashed across her canopy as she taxied out. The rain streaked sideways, and the world outside became a blur of motion and noise. But inside the cockpit, there was calm. "Hog 111, you are not cleared for," the tower's voice began. She keyed the radio. "Copy, tower, transmission unreadable, proceeding to support friendly units." Static answered her. The rest was silence. As she lifted into the storm, the clouds swallowed her whole, a gray ocean with no horizon. Thunder rolled like distant artillery, and inside the storm she felt weightless, small, infinite. Sometimes dignity doesn't ask for permission, it just acts. And somewhere beneath that boiling sky, men on the ground looked up through the rain and saw a single pair of navigation lights cutting through the darkness like hope itself. What drives a person to climb into a jet they're not cleared to fly? For Captain Avery Johnson, it wasn't glory. It wasn't defiance. It was silence, the kind that comes when someone calls for help and no one answers. The radio transmission had been faint, distorted by the storm. "Ground team pinned, armor advancing, any air asset, repeat, any air asset." No one else could go. Every other bird was grounded by weather or distance. And somewhere out there, soldiers were dying in the dark. So she went. The A-10's engines roared to life like old friends waking from a dream. Rain hammered the fuselage. Lightning painted the sky in electric veins. The crew chief sprinted through puddles, waving frantically, but she didn't see him, or maybe she just couldn't afford to. She had no clearance, no authorization, no backup, just instinct. Throttle forward. Brakes off. 30,000 pounds of stubborn metal surged down the runway. "Tower, this is Hog 111, request." Then she stopped mid-sentence. She already knew what they'd say. Instead, she whispered, "Scratch that. Hog 111 rolling." The A-10 lifted into a sky alive with chaos. Rain lashed the canopy. Wind buffeted the wings. The world outside blurred into motion, half real, half memory. It reminded her of Afghanistan. A sandstorm night. A medevac she'd covered for 2 hours until her gun jammed. The same helpless feeling in her gut. Not this time. The storm was alive, turbulence tossing her like a toy. Every lightning flash lit the cockpit in white for an instant, showing her reflection in the glass. Jaw clenched, eyes calm. Combat control came online, their signal crackling through static. Hog 111, is that you? You're not on active rotation. She keyed the mic. Negative control, I'm on scene response. Forward ground unit Alpha requesting immediate CAS. Coordinates incoming. Captain, you're not. Send the damn coordinates. Silence, then reluctantly the voice returned. Copy, transmitting grid. Enemy armor advancing from northeast, mechanized infantry, multiple APCs. Friendly position within 1 kilometer. Your weapons free. That phrase again. Weapons free. Only this time, she heard something else in it, desperation. Avery dropped altitude, radar cutting through storm clutter. She followed the faint flicker of tracer fire below, tiny, desperate sparks against the black earth. Combat control, I have visual on friendlies. Engaging. Her fingers moved automatically, switches, armament selectors, target designators. She didn't think. Thinking was too slow. Through the rain-smeared canopy, she saw the shapes, armored carriers crawling toward a ravine, muzzle flashes blooming in the dark. The ground team was trapped in that ravine. She armed a pair of Mavericks, Rifle 1, Rifle 2. The missiles vanished into the storm, their smoke trails shredded by wind. 2 seconds later, orange fireballs erupted on the ground. Enemy formation broken. But more were coming. Her threat receiver blinked red, radar lock. Shilka, she muttered. They brought a damn Shilka again. A burst of tracer fire slashed upward, red-hot lines through the rain. She banked hard left, flares spinning out like dying comets. The rounds passed close enough to rattle her teeth. The Shilka was tracking her, blind through storm but still guessing close. Avery gritted her teeth. All right, you want me, you got me. She rolled inverted, nose down, lightning flashing in the distance. Her altimeter screamed too low, too fast, but she ignored it. She'd done this before. Once, in clear skies. Never in a thunderstorm. Rifle 3, she shouted. The missile launched with a roar, disappearing into the clouds. Her eyes followed the HUD's countdown. Impact. The radar tone cut out mid-beep. Silence filled the cockpit. She exhaled, a sound halfway between laughter and relief. Control, Shilka destroyed. Continuing engagement. Hog 111 confirmed. Did you say destroyed? In this weather? Affirmative, she said. Rain doesn't stop gravity. The next 20 minutes blurred into motion and instinct. Gun runs in zero visibility. Targets illuminated by lightning flashes. Her own breath fogging the inside of her helmet. Each time she dove, she heard the faint chatter of the GAU-8 beneath her, the deep, rattling voice that always spoke truth. When she pulled up, she saw movement, tiny figures running for cover, some falling, some rising again. It never got easier to see. By the time her ammo counter hit 0, the battlefield was silent. Smoke mixed with rain. The storm itself seemed to pause, holding its breath. Control, Hog 111. All hostiles neutralized. Friendlies secure. I'm Winchester on all ordnance. Static, then a voice she recognized, Harrison's. Captain Johnson, you realize you just violated half of NATO Air Command structure. Yes, sir, she said softly. A pause. Then you also saved 47 lives. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. RTB, Captain. We'll discuss the rest when you land. The rain had eased by the time she broke through the clouds. Below, the airbase lights glimmered like faint constellations. Her hands were steady on the controls, but her heart was. Every part of her screamed fatigue. Her body ached from G-forces, from tension, from sheer stubborn will. Touchdown came hard, wheels skidding, water spraying up in arcs. The aircraft shuddered to a halt. Ground crews were waiting, flashlights bobbing in the dark. The tower stayed silent. No applause this time. No crowd, just the sound of rain. She shut down the engines. The roar faded to nothing. And then she just sat there. Helmet off, hands limp on her knees, breathing slow and even. She didn't feel heroic. She felt hollowed out, like the storm had taken something from her and left the rest behind. She climbed down, boots splashing into puddles. The tarmac smelled of ozone and burnt oil. Colonel Harrison was already there, raincoat collar up, his expression unreadable. "Walk with me," he said. They crossed the runway in silence, rain whispering against their uniforms. The storm had passed, but the thunder still rolled in the distance, like a memory unwilling to fade. Finally he spoke. "You realize what you've done, Captain?" "Yes, sir." "You launched an unauthorized combat mission, violated grounding orders, and directly disobeyed protocol." "Yes, sir." He stopped walking. "Then why aren't you defending yourself?" "Because I'd do it again," she said quietly. "Those men on the ground didn't have time to wait for approval." Harrison's jaw flexed. "You're not wrong, but command won't like it." "They don't have to," she said. "They just have to be alive to dislike it." For a moment his face softened, the faintest trace of pride breaking through command discipline. "You've got a dangerous habit of being right at inconvenient times, Captain." Avery met his gaze. "With respect, sir, I didn't come here to be convenient." The debrief that followed was short. Command couldn't decide whether to reprimand or decorate her. In the end, they did both. A formal citation for valor. An informal warning for insubordination. The duality amused her. Hero and liability, two sides of the same flight patch. But the truth was simpler. She hadn't flown for medals or politics. She'd flown because people needed her, because purpose isn't something you can switch off. Later that night, she sat alone in the hangar again. The Warthog loomed above her, glistening with rain. The engines clicked as they cooled. She leaned against the landing gear, eyes closed. For a long time she didn't move. Her hand brushed against her pocket, the piece of twisted metal Kowalski had given her. She took it out, stared at it in the dim light. The edge still bore the faint scent of oil and cordite. She turned it over between her fingers. "You almost killed me tonight," she whispered, "but you saved them." A tear slid down her cheek before she could stop it. Not for fear, not for guilt, for everything in between that gray space soldiers never talk about. She pressed the metal against her palm until it hurt. She wanted the pain. It felt like proof that she was still human. "Captain." She looked up. Major Ross stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets. He must have waited until everyone left. "Nice work," he said softly. "You broke every rule in the book." Avery gave a tired smile. "Rules keep people safe, until they don't." He nodded. "You know, most pilots chase glory. You chase responsibility. That's rarer and heavier." She didn't reply. The rain had started again, gentle now, tapping on the fuselage like soft applause. Ross hesitated, then said quietly, "You should get some rest. They'll want to debrief you again in the morning." "Yeah," she said, "morning." He started to leave, but paused. "For what it's worth, Johnson, every pilot on this base is glad you went up tonight." She smiled faintly, then it was worth it. After he left, she sat there until the hangar lights dimmed. She thought about the 47 soldiers she'd saved, their families, their lives continuing beyond this night. She thought about the ones she couldn't save in other wars, other skis. And she wondered if maybe that's what purpose really was, not glory, not medals, not applause, just the refusal to stop trying. Because war doesn't care who you are. But courage does. It finds you in the silence, in the storm, in the moment when doing nothing would be easier. And when it does, you don't ask for permission, you just fly. What happens when a hero stops feeling like one? For Captain Avery Johnson, it started quietly. Not with punishment, not with headlines, but with silence. 3 days after the storm mission, the world found out. Someone leaked footage. Gun camera clips under lightning flashes, tracer fire cutting through rain, radio chatter of a calm female voice saying, "Rifle 1, Rifle 2." It went viral before she'd even slept off the mission fatigue. Storm Angel, they called her now. The woman who flew through a thunderstorm and saved 47 lives. Every headline was a crown she didn't want. Reporters swarmed the gates. NATO spokespeople issued statements full of praise they didn't mean. Politicians called her brave from the safety of their podiums. But behind closed doors, command was furious. Unauthorized sortie. Breach of protocol. Violation of Air Command authority. Each phrase landed like a hammer. Colonel Harrison called her in for what they labeled disciplinary review. It was held in a windowless room, the kind designed to make you feel smaller. 3 officers, 1 legal representative, and a stenographer who didn't look up once. Avery stood at attention. Her uniform was immaculate, her eyes were calm, her pulse not so much. "Captain Johnson," the senior officer began, "do you acknowledge that you launched an unauthorized combat mission on the evening of the 12th, without clearance or coordination?" "Yes, sir." "Do you acknowledge that such actions constitute a breach of military protocol and put both equipment and personnel at risk?" "Yes, sir." He paused, then explained to this board why we shouldn't suspend your flight status permanently. Avery could feel the weight of their stares. She could almost hear the cameras outside the door, waiting for whatever sentence came next. She took a breath. "Because, sir, if I hadn't gone up, 47 men would be dead." The words hung there, plain, undeniable. The officer leaned back. "You took that decision upon yourself." "Yes, sir, because no one else did." "Captain, we can't operate an army where every officer acts on instinct." "With respect," she said softly, "an army that ignores instinct dies by the book." A long silence followed, the kind that tastes like truth, bitter, necessary, uncomfortable. Finally Harrison spoke from the corner. "Gentlemen, let's not pretend she's wrong." They didn't answer him, but none of them met his eyes. The meeting ended without verdict. They said they'd deliberate. In reality, they just didn't know what to do with her. That night, Avery sat alone in the officers' quarters. The wind outside howled through broken vents, and somewhere, a generator coughed in protest. Her phone buzzed messages she didn't open. Praise, interviews, invitations. Someone from a documentary team wanted her on camera. A senator wanted her at a press event. She turned the phone off. Her reflection in the dark window stared back, tired, older, eyes rimmed red from sleeplessness. She whispered, "You got them home. That's supposed to feel good." It didn't. When you save people, you carry their weight, and the weight of all the ones you couldn't. Every soldier knows that quiet after action. The stillness where the world keeps moving but you can't, because part of you is still up there, in the cockpit, under fire, doing the impossible. A knock broke the silence. "Come in," she said. It was Major Ross. He looked exhausted, uniform rumpled, coffee mug in hand. "They're not grounding you," he said without preamble. Avery raised an eyebrow. "That's unexpected." "They're not promoting you either," Ross added. "Officially, your actions remain under review. Unofficially, they're assigning you to forward recon duties, low profile, off the media grid." "Punishment dressed as trust," she said dryly. He smirked, "Something like that. You'll be flying with minimal oversight, though. I'd call that a win." She nodded slowly. "What's the mission?" "Observation patrols near the eastern corridor. Intelligence suspects enemy movement, but nothing confirmed. She frowned. The same border. Same region, Ross said. But command wants no engagement this time. Strictly recon, eyes only. Avery exhaled. Understood. He studied her for a moment. You ever think about stopping? About stepping away from the cockpit? She laughed softly, a tired, hollow sound. Every day, but the sky keeps calling. Ross nodded like he understood. Get some rest, Captain. Your wheel's up at dawn. When he left, Avery sat there for a long time, staring at the flight orders glowing faintly on her tablet. Observation, no engagement. Just watch. Just wait. Sometimes waiting was the hardest mission of all. Dawn came gray and heavy. Low clouds pressed against the horizon. The air smelled like rain and fuel. Avery walked across the flight line in silence. Her boots left faint prints on wet concrete. Ground crews moved in slow rhythm around her, preparing the aircraft. She ran her hand along the A-10's fuselage. The metal was cold. The nose art, a small stenciled quote she hadn't authorized, read, Storm Angel. She stared at it for a long time, then sighed. Guess that's permanent now. Kowalski appeared, wrench in hand. Compliments of the crew, he said. Figured she earned a name. She, Avery said, smiling faintly. Always she. Only things that deadly and loyal ever are. She didn't argue, he was right. The pre-flight checks came naturally. Switches, gauges, readings, all green. She strapped in, closed the canopy, and felt the world narrow again. In here everything made sense. Out there nothing did. Control, this is Hog 111, ready for recon departure. Copy, Hog 111, cleared for takeoff. Maintain radio silence beyond waypoint Delta. Roger that, rolling. The A-10 thundered down the runway and lifted into the gray. The clouds were thick, the light dim. She climbed through the layers until the world turned bright again, blue sky above a blanket of white. Up here it was always beautiful. Peaceful. Deceptive. She leveled off at 10,000 feet, autopilot steady, sensors sweeping. Below, the borderland stretched out like a wound healing badly, patches of green, black scars of old fire. Her radar pinged once, twice, a cluster of faint returns. She frowned. Control, Hog 111. I have unidentified ground movement, grid sector Echo 9er. Static. Control, confirm comms. Nothing. She checked her systems. Everything green, signal clear, but the network was dead. Great, she muttered. Not again. She banked south to re-establish line of sight, eyes scanning the terrain. Through the mist she saw its smoke, faint and curling. Not an accident, not weather. Something was burning. Her targeting pod magnified the view. Convoy 10, maybe 12 vehicles, armored, no friendly transponders. Her stomach tightened. Recon only, she reminded herself, no engagement. She watched as the convoy halted. Soldiers spilled out. They weren't local militia, too organized, too well-equipped. They were setting something up. Then she saw it, a launcher, mobile surface-to-air system. She froze. They were assembling a SAM site inside NATO airspace. Control, this is Hog 111. Priority report. Confirmed surface-to-air setup at coordinates. Static. The comms were dead again. She felt the slow rise of dread in her chest. If they activated that system, every friendly aircraft within 50 miles would be in danger. Her mind raced. She could mark it and return, report it, let someone else handle it. That was the right choice, the disciplined choice. But that launcher was almost ready. She watched one soldier climb onto the vehicle, opening a panel. Another connected a power line. 5 minutes, maybe less. She exhaled, not again. Her thumb flipped the master arm cover open. The first Maverick streaked downward. Rifle 1. Impact, explosion. The launcher vanished in a column of fire. The second missile hit the supply truck beside it. Rifle 2. The formation erupted in chaos. Men running, vehicles revering, flames spreading. Her threat receiver lit up. They were scanning, panicking, trying to lock her. Avery climbed hard, cutting through the clouds, the world flashing bright and dark around her. She switched back to the gun, Hog 111 in hot. The GAU-8 roared, thunder joining thunder. The sound tore through the air like judgment. Then silence again. The radar pings faded. The convoy was gone. She'd done it again. Saved lives, broken orders. A slow, hollow laugh escaped her. I really am terrible at following instructions. When she returned, the base was waiting, not cheering this time, waiting. She shut down the engines, climbed out, and found Major Ross standing there with crossed arms and a look that wasn't anger, just disappointment. "Tell me you didn't fire ordnance," he said. "I didn't want to," she said quietly, "but they were setting up a SAM inside our airspace." Ross exhaled through his nose. "Avery, command gave you one rule." "I know. You broke it anyway." She nodded. "I did." He rubbed a hand over his face. "You might have just started an incident that'll take weeks to contain." She looked him in the eye, or stopped one that would have taken lives to end. They stared at each other in silence. Finally, he said, "You know what your problem is, Johnson. You keep being right just at the wrong time." She smiled faintly. "Story of my life." That night she sat on the edge of her bunk, staring at her hands. They still trembled faintly. She hated that. Kowalski had left a note on her locker. "Whatever happens, you did what was right." But right and easy were rarely the same thing. She looked out the small window. The night sky was clear again, moonlight cutting silver lines across the tarmac. The warthog sat there, quiet, waiting. And she wondered, not for the first time, how many rules a person could break before they stopped being a soldier and started being something else entirely. But deep down, she already knew the answer. A soldier isn't defined by orders. A soldier is defined by what they protect and what they're willing to risk to do it. She lay back, exhaustion finally dragging her down. Sleep didn't come easy. It never did. But just before she drifted off, a thought crossed her mind, soft, uninvited, dangerous. "If the world keeps making me choose between permission and people, I'll keep choosing people." And somewhere outside, under the floodlights, the A-10 waited, silent, patient, alive. Because the sky had found its pilot again. And the world wasn't done testing her yet. They called her to headquarters at 600. No explanation, no details, just an order: report to Command Building Level 4. That was never good news. Avery walked through the morning mist, her uniform heavy with the smell of jet fuel and sleeplessness. The base was waking up, engines whining in the distance, mechanics shouting over compressors, but the noise sounded different now. Distant, cautious. She'd flown 2 unauthorized missions in less than a month, saved lives both times, broken every rule in the book to do it. And today, the book was coming for her. Inside the building, the corridors were too clean, too quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes verdicts. At the far end waited a conference room with blinds drawn and 6 unfamiliar faces around a long steel table, flags on the wall, recorders on the desk, uniforms she didn't recognize. Colonel Harrison stood off to one side, arms crossed, jaw tight. He didn't meet her eyes. That was all the warning she needed. "Captain Johnson," the senior officer said, "take a seat." She did. The man's voice was clipped, rehearsed. "You are here under review for multiple operational breaches, unauthorized combat engagement, failure to report engagement outcomes through proper channels, and actions resulting in international diplomatic risk." Avery said nothing. "Before we begin," the officer continued, You should know that your actions in both incidents have received global attention. You've been praised as a hero. You've also complicated several ongoing negotiations. You understand the gravity of that. Yes, sir, she said evenly. Good, now tell us why. Why I acted. Yes. She took a breath, then spoke quietly. Because waiting costs lives. Because rules are written by people who don't bleed from the decisions they make. Because the right thing doesn't always come through proper channels. The words hung in the air, sharp as shrapnel. One of the officers leaned forward. Do you realize what you're saying, Captain? That you consider your judgment superior to the chain of command? No, sir, she said. I'm saying my judgment was faster. A faint stir went through the room. Harrison's mouth twitched, not a smile, not approval, but the ghost of both. Another officer, younger, spoke next. You disobeyed standing orders twice. What if you'd been wrong? What if your intel was off? What if those convoys were friendlies? Avery met his gaze. Then I'd carry that for the rest of my life, but I'd still rather live with guilt than with regret. The younger man didn't answer. The senior officer cleared his throat. Captain Johnson, under normal circumstances, you would be grounded permanently. However, he paused, glancing at a folder before him. However, given your record and the operational results, command is divided. He slid the folder across the table. There's another situation developing. We need a pilot with your skill set. Avery frowned. You're giving me a mission. Consider it an opportunity to redeem yourself, or to prove this board wrong. Harrison finally spoke. Captain, you don't have to accept this. She looked at him. If I do. They'll ground you, he said quietly, this time for good. She exhaled, the decision already made. Where and when? The senior officer nodded. Eastern border. Intelligence reports hostile movement again. Same area. You'll be on Alert 5 status. You'll take orders from forward command only. And Captain. Yes, sir. This time, you wait for authorization. Avery smiled faintly. I'll do my best. He didn't smile back. Outside, Harrison caught up with her on the steps. The morning wind was sharp, cutting through her uniform. You realize what they're doing, he said. They're testing you. I know. They want you to fail, to prove the rules matter more than instinct. Then I guess I'll have to prove both can survive in the same person. He studied her face, the calm behind the exhaustion. You're burning both ends of the fuse, Captain. You can't keep doing this forever. She looked toward the horizon where the clouds broke into pale light. Forever's overrated, sir. I just need to make it count while I can. He almost smiled. For what it's worth, Johnson, the world needs a few rule breakers. Just don't let them break you in return. By nightfall, she was wheels up again. Not for combat, not yet, but for readiness drills. The Warthog felt different under her hands tonight, heavier somehow. The engine's hum carried a low sorrow, like the machine knew what she was walking back into. She flew low over the borderlands, the same scarred ground she'd defended before. The villages below looked peaceful, lights flickering like candles in the dark. She thought of the people down there, the farmers, the families, the ones who'd never know her name but would sleep safely because she'd refused to stay grounded. And then she thought of her father again, the old photograph tucked in her locker, him in flight gear, smiling at something out of frame. He'd always said flying wasn't about control, it was about trust. She whispered to the night, I'm still trying, Dad. The radio crackled suddenly. Hog 111, this is forward command. Be advised, you are approaching restricted airspace. She blinked, copy command, adjusting course. But something in the tone caught her, too sharp, too rehearsed. Command, confirm you have me on radar. Silence. Then another voice, faint, overlapping, panicked. Taking fire, repeat, this is Alpha Unit taking heavy fire, requesting immediate CAS. Her stomach dropped. Alpha unit, say again your position. Static, then coordinates dangerously close to her sector. She glanced at the timer on her console. No orders yet, no clearance. Her hands hovered over the controls. Every instinct screamed go. Every rule said wait. And for the first time, she hesitated. The memory of Harrison's warning echoed in her mind. They're testing you. If she acted now, she'd confirm everything her critics believed. If she didn't, men might die. Alpha unit, this is Hog 111. I read you. Hold position. Another burst of static explosions shouting, "We can't, they're flanking." That was all it took. Throttle forward. Hog 111 rolling hot. The engine screamed their agreement. She descended through clouds, sensors locking onto muzzle flashes below. Armored vehicles again, same insignia as before. No question this time. She armed her Mavericks, Rifle 1, Rifle 2. The missiles hit true. Fire bloomed across the field. She switched to the gun, Hog 111 in hot. The cannon spoke, a metallic snarl swallowed by wind and distance. The ground lit up, shadows scattering. Within seconds, the ambush dissolved. The surviving soldiers broke and ran. Alpha unit, this is Hog 111. You're clear. No answer, then a single voice, breathless. Thank you, ma'am, whoever you are. She smiled sadly. Nobody special. When she landed an hour later, they were waiting again, this time without pretense. Military police, command officers, Harrison standing behind them, eyes downcast. Avery cut the engines and climbed down. Rain had started again, thin and cold. Captain Johnson, one of the MPs, said, "You're ordered to accompany us." For what? Violation of direct operational command, unauthorized engagement. Harrison stepped forward. She saved an entire unit, you can't. Colonel, the MP interrupted, orders from higher than either of us. Avery nodded once. It's all right, sir. She handed over her helmet, her sidearm, her flight ID, the ritual of grounding. As they walked her across the tarmac, headlights glared through the rain, turning her shadow long and thin against the concrete. Someone shouted from the hangar, Kowalski's voice, rough and angry. "You can't ground her. She's the only reason any of you are breathing." No one answered him. Inside the vehicle, the door slammed shut, sealing her in with her thoughts. She looked out the window at the aircraft sitting silent in the rain, the one piece of the world that ever made sense. She whispered, "Don't let them cage you too." They put her in an office, not a cell, a courtesy for heroes on probation. No one spoke to her for hours. The clock ticked. Rain drummed on the roof. Finally, the door opened. Harrison stepped in, dripping wet. "You shouldn't have gone," he said. "I know. You saved them again." "I know that too." He sighed. "They'll make an example out of you, Avery. They have to. The system can't survive officers making their own wars." She looked up. Maybe the system shouldn't survive if it forgets what wars are for. He didn't argue. He just looked at her, really looked, and saw what the medals and headlines never showed. The exhaustion in her eyes, the quiet ache of someone who'd done everything right and was still paying for it. After a long moment, he said, "I'll fight for you, but this time you might have to save yourself." "How?" "By remembering that you're not the storm. You're the pilot. You choose where it hits." Then he left, leaving the door slightly open. Hours later, alone again, Avery watched dawn seep through the blinds, a slow wash of pale light over concrete walls. Outside, engines started. Another day, another rotation. Someone else would fly her missions now. She thought of the soldiers she'd saved, the rules she'd broken, the thin line between hero and scapegoat. Then she whispered, "They can ground me, but they can't ground what I am." Because some wars aren't fought in the sky. Some are fought inside the soul, between what's right, what's allowed, and what's left of you afterward. And even grounded, Avery Johnson was still a pilot. She'd already learned how to fly through storms. Now she just had to learn how to live through calm. They made her wait 3 days. 3 days of silence. 3 days of questions whispered behind closed doors, of footsteps passing the door and never stopping. 3 days of watching the sunlight crawl across concrete walls, wondering if that was what judgment looked like, slow, inevitable, indifferent. On the morning of the 4th day, the door opened. "Captain Johnson," said a voice she didn't recognize, "the tribunal is ready." She stood, smoothed her uniform, and followed. Outside, the corridor buzzed faintly with voices. Reporters weren't allowed on base, but rumor traveled faster than sound. Everyone knew what this was: the trial of the woman who'd done too much of the right thing the wrong way. The tribunal chamber was cold. No flags this time, no press, no ceremony, just 6 officers and a single microphone. The kind of room designed not for justice, but for conclusions. Colonel Harrison was there. So was Major Ross. Both silent. Both wearing the look soldiers get when they've already lost the argument but still showed up for the fight. Avery took her seat. "Captain Johnson," the presiding officer began, "this tribunal has reviewed the circumstances of your actions during both unauthorized combat engagements. We have heard testimony from commanding officers, field witnesses, and survivors. We have also reviewed the operational footage." He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "The footage speaks for itself." Avery didn't reply. "Before we deliver our findings," he continued, "you are permitted a final statement. Do you wish to make one?" She stood. The chair's scrape echoed in the room like an accusation. "No, sir," she said, then paused. "Actually, yes, sir, I do." The officers waited. Avery looked at them, not defiantly but steadily, as if weighing the truth in her hands. "I understand that I broke protocol," she began. "Twice. I understand what that means, and I'm not asking you to excuse it." She glanced briefly at Harrison, then back to the table. "But I also know what I saw out there. I saw men trapped under fire. I saw families living under skis that didn't belong to them anymore. I saw the cost of waiting for permission." She took a slow breath. "When I signed up, I was told that courage was doing your duty no matter the cost. But no one told me that sometimes duty means defying fear, even when fear comes wearing a uniform." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The silence that followed gave her words their weight. "I won't justify what I did. I'll just say this: I don't regret it. Not one life I saved. Not one rule I broke to do it. Because when the storm hit, I was the only one in the air. And if you ground me for that, then maybe it's the sky that's wrong, not me." Then she sat. No applause, no response, just a faint rustle of papers as the tribunal conferred quietly. 5 minutes, 10, 20. Finally, the presiding officer spoke. "Captain Johnson, this tribunal finds that while your actions violated standing orders, they resulted in the preservation of Allied forces and the prevention of further civilian casualties. Your conduct is deemed inconsistent with standard procedure, but consistent with the highest traditions of military service." He closed the folder. "Your flight status is reinstated, effective immediately." For a moment she didn't move. The words didn't register, they just hung there. Then Harrison exhaled, a breath he'd been holding for days. Ross smiled barely. The officer continued, "However, you are hereby reassigned to a training command, non-combat. You'll instruct incoming pilots on emergency protocol and mission ethics, effective tomorrow." Avery blinked. "Training." He nodded. "You've shown initiative, courage, and disobedience, all of which make you the perfect teacher. Maybe the next generation can learn from you without repeating you." She wanted to argue but stopped herself. There was no punishment in his tone, no mockery, just weary respect. "Understood, sir," she said quietly. The gavel hit the desk once, Tribunal adjourned. Outside, the sky was wide and pale, the kind of blue that made you forget war for a heartbeat. The base was alive again, engines humming, boots echoing on wet pavement. Harrison walked beside her. Neither spoke for a while. Finally, he said, "You handled that with more grace than most generals I've known." Avery gave a faint smile. "I'm too tired for speeches." He nodded. "Still, you did good, Johnson." She looked toward the hangars. The Warthog sat there in sunlight for the first time in days, streaks of rain still drying across its armor. "Guess she's yours again," Harrison said. "Not for long," she replied. "Training command, remember." He shrugged. "Birds like that don't forget who flew them." They stopped by the flight line. The air was quiet, filled only with the distant thrum of engines and the soft click of maintenance tools. "Sir," she said after a moment, "do you ever wonder if doing the right thing still matters, after everything?" He turned to her. "All the time, but then I remember if it doesn't, we're already lost." She nodded slowly. "Guess that's enough then." Her new post wasn't glamorous. No headlines, no missions, just a hangar full of rookies who stared at her like she was a legend carved from steel and rumor. She walked among them, listening to their chatter, the same nervous jokes, the same eagerness she once had. "Captain Johnson," one of them asked, "what's the most important thing a pilot should know before a mission?" She paused, then said quietly, "That the aircraft doesn't save you, you save each other, and you never ever confuse orders with truth." The room went still, then slowly they nodded. Months passed. She taught flight ethics, emergency combat response, crisis judgment. She drilled them on scenarios she'd lived, always changing the endings, always asking the same question: what would you do? Most gave the textbook answers. A few gave the real ones. Those were the ones she watched closely. Outside of class, she still walked the flight line at dusk. The Warthog remained there, retired but not forgotten, gleaming under fading light. Sometimes, when no one was around, she'd climb up into the cockpit and just sit. No helmet, no flight suit, just her and the silence. The smell of oil and metal felt like home. One evening she found a small envelope wedged in the throttle housing. No markings. Inside, a photo, taken from a helmet cam, grainy and blurred. Soldiers standing under rain, looking up. In the distance, a pair of lights cut through the storm. On the back, a note: "You saved us, 47 of us, we never forgot." Avery stared at it for a long time. Her throat tightened. She folded the photo carefully and tucked it into her pocket, next to the twisted fragment of metal Kowalski had given her months ago. Some souvenirs don't shine. Some bleed. Some remind you why you keep flying, even when they try to ground your heart. On her last day before reassignment to headquarters, she stood on the runway as the next generation of pilots took off, a roar of engines rising into the blue. She watched them climb, bank, disappear into light. Ross walked up beside her. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" "What does?" "Letting go." She smiled faintly. "You never really let go of the sky, you just learn to live under it." He nodded. "Command wants you to give a closing statement to your trainees, something to inspire them." She chuckled softly. "You know me, Ross, I don't do speeches." "Maybe just one," he said. "They deserve to hear it from you." She thought for a long moment, then stepped forward, watching the last jet vanish into the distance. Her voice was quiet, carried by wind. "Flying isn't about control," she said. "It's about trust, trust in your machine, in your crew, in yourself. And when that trust is tested, when the rules fall away and all that's left is the decision, you don't ask if it's allowed. You ask if it's right." She turned back toward the hangar, her shadow stretching long across the tarmac. Because sometimes the difference between breaking orders and saving lives is a heartbeat, and sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. That night she packed her duffel in silence. Her room was empty now, except for the faint hum of the base outside. Before leaving, she pinned her flight wings back onto her chest, not for the uniform but for herself. In the mirror she looked older, calmer, not unscarred but unbroken. She whispered, still flying. Then she turned off the light and stepped into the night. The runway stretched before her, lined with faint blue lights. The sky above was open, infinite, waiting. And for the first time in a long time, Avery Johnson smiled, not because she'd won, not because she'd been forgiven, but because she finally understood something the sky had been trying to tell her all along. That storms don't define pilots. What they do in silence afterward does.